Hello, everybody. I'd like to officially welcome you to Visual Storytelling, Unleashing Your Creativity with Your Writer's Brain. My name is Shelley Hayduck, and I'm co-hosting today with Matt Caton, our Director of Customer Solutions.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We've got a fun webinar today. Typically, Shelley and I are presenting the brain under the context of preparing your taxes or file management or business management. Today, we're going to shift gears and talk about using your brain in very, very creative ways. So it's a fun webinar. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for joining us. And the brain can be used in terms of many different aspects. For writers and the creative industry, there's conception, and then there's all the way to development, getting that project going and started, to completion. So the brain can actually be used in all phases of your creative projects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I like to call inspirational warehousing and referencing, which is absolutely amazing for getting a project going, injecting creativity into projects or product management where you're just not quite there yet, to just getting that work down to file management. So, how do you get started? You might have a document that you're working on, that you would normally, as a writer, I'd go ahead, I'd open up Word here and, get Word going, taking some time, and maybe I'm writing my next masterpiece, once upon a time, ... Okay, great, I've got Word, and it's literally a blank canvas. Or maybe I'm writing my next product release. So this product is amazing, ... But where do I go from there? Am I going to have to then kind of go into folders and start digging around? I do have a folder on story development, so I can kind of look at everything I have. Sorry, guys, not very inspirational, is it? So where I like to go, and I am a professional writer, both for TheBrain and for some private projects. I also know and work with a lot of script writers and story concept artists right here in Los Angeles, California as well, for various projects. And I can tell you what I like to do is I like to use my writer's brain. So I'm going to give you guys a basic tour of the writer's brain, and then I'm going to talk to you about getting down to business in this brain as well. So for those of you that are new to the brain, pieces of information in the brain are what we call thoughts. And a thought can represent literally any type of digital information that you have. I actually have my distant thoughts on. I'm going to actually just make the font on this a little bit smaller. Sorry, guys. The web meeting's making this a little bit more sensitive and to adjust than normally is here. And what I do is I have key areas, or what I like to call buckets, for thoughts in my brain. I just shut off my distant thoughts so we can focus on the architecture of this brain. So this particular brain has everything that's relevant for me for both creative fiction writing as well as nonfiction writing. So let me just talk to you about a few things. First of all, I'm going to go into the most basic section you could have for your writer's brain, and it's a thought on your writing projects. So I've got things for company blog that I'm working on, corporate brochures, fiction, journal articles, research, just articles, web links to different podcasts that I find interesting in the brain. And one of the nice things about the brain is when I click on any one of these thoughts, I'm getting all my reference material in a context that represents how I think about it. And I can actually reorient the display, which I'm going to do just so you guys can see. I actually like my brain top, bottom, but there's the little sliders where I can change this to sort of page view to the side, so you can do whatever works with you. But one of the great things about organizing information about thoughts is your ideas, like a thought, will fit in many different categories. You'll have many different connections. The hallmark of creative thinking is associative connections, and that's what we do well. So this podcast that's put on by the Writers Guild, I have organized under many different things. It's related to a writer's project that I'm doing, so I have it under writer's project. It, of course, is about script writing, so I have it here under script writing, and, of course, under the Writers Guild. So let's say I was just in my brain on script writing. I could have got to that particular area. So I could have got to this particular website, seen it, but also had access to, my new sci-fi document that I'm working on, my sci-fi adventure, and launched this particular web page, because these thoughts aren't just about creating this cool, Visio diagram. It is that, and it does provide you with an amazing context for your ideas, but we're actually linking and connecting to these relevant file sources. So web pages, folders, PowerPoint presentations, in this case, a Word document, and I'll talk about version control and how you can use the brain to manage multiple versions of your writing content. It's all right here in the brain. So just to give you kind of an outline, and then, of course, thinking about how things are related, there's a thought I have on classes of science fiction, which is also a really interesting website, which connects to heroes, which takes me to a more theoretical section in my brain, which is all about character development. So I've got lists of heroes. Now, the way the brain visualizes information, for those of you that are new to the brain, is anything below your active thought is a subcategory. So under characters, I have how to create a character profile. I also have a conversation with Nora Roberts, who's a writer, sympathy for different types of characters, and then I have character types, what Joseph Campbell considers character archetypes. So if I click on this particular thought and I tab over to the web page, what you'll see is I have a whole definition. I can look at what character archetypes are, their function, from everywhere from Plato to Jungian archetypes to other things. And the great thing that's really nice about the brain is I can continue to build information. So if I like the idea of maybe Carl Jung in my brain, and now I'm just navigating through the brain's web browser. Of course, I can open this in a separate website, is I can take this link and add it in to my brain under character archetypes. So that's kind of interesting. This is a new person, Carl Jung, but he might be related to, I might want to put him above character archetypes, who he's sort of inspirational to generating these character archetypes, as well as linking to, and let me just go ahead and create a link to Joseph Campbell, who is maybe the Joseph Campbell, well, let's use Joseph Campbell. So now I've got people who actually are theorists in writing. So you see how I'm weaving from project to the inspirations behind these projects in literally just a couple clicks. Now, this is pretty amazing if you're an academic researcher, if you're a writer, because back to what we get otherwise, the documents or the folders, not so inspirational, is it? So let's just go a little bit further. Speaking of inspirations, I absolutely do recommend that you create a section in your brain called what you're inspired by. So anyway, I've got Joseph Campbell. You can see I use a lot of zoomable icons and wallpapers, and Matt will get into kind of how to create the wallpaper and the icon. It's very easy to do. But what this does for me is this keeps this brain very separate and creative from other brains that may not be, quite as interesting. So this is my writer's brain. I use it for inspirational warehousing. I use it for very purist writing projects, but I also have a brain. And I want to talk to other people about this, just a section in my brain that's a little more, I guess, basic in my generic brain on writing projects. So and that's in my marketing section and under active projects. So for those of you business users on the call who are thinking, gee, I don't need a writer's brain with ominous stares and, mapping out Joseph Campbell, that's fine too, okay? So you can go to getting very creative, creating that context too. I just have a thought in my marketing brain, writer's projects, and the great thing about this is the brain is so flexible. It's going to reflect your unique way of working and thinking. So in this particular section, I'm a little bit more, let's get down to business. I've got all my key writers projects, and I have a checklist. So this is the notes area. Each thought can have an attachment, any number of attachments. So I've actually got a writer's projects document that I can launch and a note here. So if I'm done, this is all about my company brochure, what I haven't done and what I have done. So if I've already looked for new printers, I can take a checklist or I can add a new item as far as legal secondary review here as another step that must be taken. So now I've got legal secondary review in this checklist. And of course, I can take notes on different reference materials. The other thing that's really cool is the content area is really nice for just looking at different types of files. Like for instance, here's a PDF as well. And it's actually taking a while to load because of the web browser. But what you'll see is you have a very nice document preview right here in the brain as well. And of course, these documents can be opened up separately also, but it's very nice to see these different URLs that you have connected. And of course, again, the brain's always giving me more information than I need. This social media guide is not just under my writing projects in this brain, but under marketing resources. So that takes me to a whole different area. From there, I can click on, Malcolm Gladwell, who is, a more theoretical guy who writes about all kinds of marketing and different states of the world and so forth. And marketing resources is part of my marketing section, which is part of my business in this particular brain. So it's very easy to, again, create that context for your work. And what that context is going to do is it's going to facilitate discovery of information and ideas that would otherwise be overlooked. Now, there's also an efficient aspect of this. If I just want to go to the brochure that I'm working on, the company brochure, I can just type in the first couple of letters, in this case, bro, and then boom, I've moved to my company brochure and I found that document. Or if I need to look for the client proposal that I'm writing about, I can just start clicking red, knowing it's Red Cross, and there's my Red Cross case study. So I can move very quickly from one section of my brain that's all about writing to another section that's all about client management by using the search capability. And it's important to note that the search, and I'll just go ahead and type in Red Cross here, is going to be searching not just your thought names, but the contents of those documents as well. So anything within those documents, if you want to do a keyword as well, it will find that. So just using the brain to search and index all your documents in and of itself is a great tool, let alone the context. So if you want to create just a more simple aspect for your documents, you can do that. So I'm going to tab back to Joseph Campbell, to my more interesting brain, but I just really wanted to show you both types of brains so you can get a sense of how unique, and wait until you see Matt's brain, which has some even more creative content in it, just to give you a sense of the different, the spectrum of brains that can be created for you to get what you need done out of the product. So back to inspirations now, moving away from, just regular projects to my inspirations. I like to create this section. Now this can be, if you're a fashion designer, this should be, like Yves Saint Laurent or, Chanel, like the designers that inspire you. Or if you're a product designer, it can be links, screen grabs to cool products that you like. The brain is great for doing those design documents and designing as well. So in this case, I have a whole section on Joseph Campbell. I have a great section here on Franz Kafka. I've got different links to, different stories and all kinds of things. So if we go to Edgar Allan Poe, I've got stuff on The Telltale Heart. Now, perhaps this particular project of mine, this particular classic work of The Telltale Heart, which is a rather dark tale, is related to something I'm doing. So I've got a connection to The Blue Rose, which is a fictional story that I'm actually working on. So you can see I've got various documents here, actually a publisher and another document, and I've got links to the settings that it's going to be. And this is how I came up with the haunted stairwell, because I'm actually working on a story of the blue rose, and it's more of a dark tale. And so this is where I can start to make my connections. If I want to get into it might be a tale of technology going bad, this sort of thing. So I've got links to different stories. So there's a character in the Terminator I happen to have in my brain that makes sense. And of course, I have this also linked to Frankenstein, because the precursor, which should be apparent to that particular type of movie, is actually Frankenstein, which is written by Mary Shelley. And I can browse some of these references by conflict theme. So humans versus technology. That's just another type of conflict that is in fiction, storytelling, and of course there are certain movies that meet that, and certain works of art like Frankenstein, The Matrix, Blade Runner, and so on and so forth. And we've got all kinds of things. So we can actually go into Star Wars here, and that takes us to George Lucas, which of course George Lucas was very inspired by the heroic journey, which was of course created by Joseph Campbell. For those of you that aren't familiar with literary theory, he wrote a quintessential, dare I say, archetypal book on a hero with 1,000 faces, which basically has the full element of the heroic journey that all classic stories, Disney uses this a lot to modern day script writing, they still use this. So that takes us to Joseph Campbell, which of course is, he outlines elements of story. So I have that there, and that takes me back up to my inspirations and my writer's brain. So you can really get a sense of how intricate these things are, and how much fun it is to really move around and get to the information. But what I want to do is I actually want to start creating a new project too. So you can see, this isn't all just let's map out the internet and all my amazing role models. Let's get down to business in this brain. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a spring company brochure. So I'm just creating in my brochure section. I'm going to call this my 2019 spring product lookbook. Let's just say I'm working for a fashion company. So I've got this particular thought in my brain. So from here, I'm getting down to business. I can actually go ahead and add an attachment and create that attachment right in my brain. I don't have to start it elsewhere. So I'm starting on my spring product lookbook. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create a document, a Microsoft document. So here is all the amazing stuff this company is offering, ... And I can go ahead and save that. So go to File and Save, and that just gets saved in my thought folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that. And in this case, this particular document I don't need, so I'm not going to save that one. And I've got this document now in my brain. Now, the other thing I love to do when I'm working on a new writing project is I love to take notes on what I need to do. This will be an overview of our new collection. So the other thing that's great is, of course, with the notes, I can come in here and create check boxes. I can go ahead and timestamp things. I can do all kinds of great things in the notes section. I actually like to take notes on different versions, and you can do versioning in the brain. So let me go ahead and, again, just launch this document. I'm coming to it again. I've been to a while, and I create all kinds of new and improved changes. In this case, I'll just go ahead and change the font so we can have some changes. And I'm going to save this as a different version. So I just go to Save As, and you'll see what it does is it's actually going to save it in the current thought folder. Each one of your pieces of information in the brain have a unique thought folder. So it's not that different from, obviously putting something in a folder. So you just click on that, and in this case, I want to keep it in that thought folder, so I'm not changing anything up here, but what I'm going to do is actually put number 2 here. So what this is going to do is it's going to save this as a secondary version, in my brain. And I mean, I know I'm a writer. I have sometimes 10 versions of a document, if I'm taking things in or out. So the thing that's great about that is now I've got my document versions. And for me, I actually like to, let me switch this around here so we can see what's going on. You can actually change the way this looks. I'll move this. If you're more into your documents, you can right click on this tab and do attachments as a list. So you have attachments as a list at the bottom, or if they're or the side, so you can see them here and get a little bit more information. And your notes can be here. So I can say, if I want to take notes on this version is, or I'll say something like version 1 is reviewed by legal team. Legal team, version 2, new ideas, but not approved. Now, this is great for me to remember what these different versions are, but if I'm sharing my brain as a team brain, this is even better because I'm sort of annotating and letting people know, hey, what's going on with these different documents. So I'm creating essentially metadata. And we can take it a step further, and I can also start to tag particular thoughts in my brain. So what I can do, if I want to right click on this thought, is I have tags for information. So if I want to create a fiction or something to do, or use a thought type, I have thought types mostly for characters and motivation and background and things like that. But if I want it to be tagged as something to do in a series or a book or story unit, I can go ahead and set up that thought type. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and leave things as are. But there are many ways to add that wonderful metadata to your brain. And now you can see I've got that piece of information started in my brain. Now, the other thing that I can do is I can actually drag and drop existing pieces of information. So I'm just going to move over here. And let's say my corporate brochure, I want to go ahead and integrate this business plan. So I'm simply going to drag and drop from my desktop. And what this does is this creates a copy. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and make it a shortcut, I can hold down the Alt key, or if I hold down the Shift key, it'll go ahead. And you have different options for whether you want to move the file or copy. In this case, I'm going to copy it. So I'm just going to drag below, because what I want to do is actually just have a copy of this in the brain, and it's being stored local. So now I've dragged and dropped my business plan under corporate brochures. And actually, if it belongs under this new project, my 2019 lookbook, I can move that there as well. So you can see how easy it is to go ahead and add. And my lookbook, I'm relying on some different types of information. I have a growth potential, a marketing document that I need as I'm writing this that I want to reference. So I'm going to drag and drop that in as well. So now I'm going ahead and integrating existing information as well. Now it's just as easy to do that with a folder. So if I want to come into my writing projects and drag my full folder on story development, I can go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and do that, drag and drop this. And now this folder is actually copied, and I've got access to that folder. So let me just move my notes area here. I can actually click on this, and it's going to launch that folder, and I get access to all that stuff. Now I'm going to go ahead and let me just right click and a shift right click on this. I'm going to delete this, because the other thing I can do as far as integrating folders of content is I can actually import this folder. And what the difference between just dragging and dropping a folder and importing it is if you have subfolders. So I have a subfolder called Shark with other content on a new story I'm working on. It's going to parse through that a little more. So I'm actually going to go up to my file, and I'm going to select import. And we have a whole host of amazing importing options. In this case, I'm going to add it to the writer's brain. It's not going to be creating a new brain, and I'm going to do a folder. So I'm going to select the folder now, and it's going to be story development. Hit OK, and select to import it. And I want to go ahead and get that import done. And now what you'll see, this is kind of cool, is I've got all my attachments coming in, and my folder for story development is imported. And you can actually see on the side here, I've got, and I'll just move this up so we can see it a little better here. I've got all my 3 documents accessible from this thought, and the subfolder is also mapped in my brain, which is actually a story I'm working on called Shark, and I've got all those documents as well. And from there, this is kind of interesting. This is going under fiction, because this is more of a, you know, a personal, just fun project. So I'm going to put it under fiction as well. And now what's cool about that is something that was otherwise just kind of stuck in a folder on my desktop is now in my brain, this new project on Shark, and I can link it to all kinds of things. Maybe I want to link it to, you know, villains or different things, or, you know, different guys, or there's a type of character called a shapeshifter that's going to be related to some stuff I'm doing in the archetype world. So I'm going to put it under that as well. Maybe just this is more of a jump, and, you know, get creative. But here you can see all the connections that are really coming to life. Now that I did that folder import, you know, how simple and easy is that? And I think with that, that's sort of the basics on, you know, how to actually just start that Word document, start that project in your brain, and combine it with a little inspirational warehousing. But I think Matt actually has a brain that you'll also find quite inspirational. So Matt, if there aren't any further questions, we're at the halfway mark. I think I'm going to hand things over to you now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And yes, I'm happy to share my brain example with you as soon as I take the screen over. Stand by just one moment.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm throwing the ball your way.
Okay, there we go. And let me make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. Yes, I am. So my brain is just a bit different. It's still under the topic of writing, but the main difference is that these are not my writings. I am not the writer or the author. I have a brain on William Shakespeare. And before I get started sharing my brain with you, I'd like to specify that I am not a Shakespearean expert or historian. I would categorize myself as just an enthusiast. So I enjoy reading Shakespeare, I enjoy seeing Shakespearean plays or movies, and I've got a lot of that information in my brain. Now, you may also say to yourself, well, the complete works of Shakespeare are out there on the web. This is nothing new. So I'd like to share with you the differences between viewing Shakespeare in my brain, my collection of Shakespearean works, and how I categorize them and interact with them, as opposed to just going online and doing a search for all's well that ends well. This brain does contain the complete works of Shakespeare. I've spent some time working on this brain, and over the years, I've added every single word known to Shakespeare into this brain. And also at the end of the webinar today, we'll share a link, or you'll receive an email after attending the webinar with a link to view this brain online. So you can browse through my Shakespearean brain for a little bit of inspiration if you're interested. But the first place I'm going to go is into Shakespearean literature. And notice that I've categorized him. This is a very typical categorization of Shakespearean works: comedy, history, poetry of Shakespeare. He's not very well known for, but he did definitely write several works of poetry, which is different than his sonnets. And he has 200, and I can't remember the full number of sonnets that he's written, but or maybe it's 154. Actually, yes, there it is on my note, 154 sonnets. So they're all here. And the one that I want to share with you is number 122. So that's CXX. Let me just scroll over. CXXII, 122. And this is an interesting sonnet because from time to time I'll go through and just pick 10 sonnets and read through them. And believe me, it takes even someone that's familiar with Shakespeare and his writing technique and iambic pentameter, it takes me a little while to understand exactly what it is that Shakespeare is trying to say. And I've got some great resources in this brain to help me with that. But the first 2 lines of this Shakespearean sonnet: "Thy gift, thy tables are within my brain, full charactered with lasting memory." And basically what this means is everything that I receive, all the information or the data that I'm given or that I receive are within my brain, meaning in my brain, I think obviously is what he meant, full charactered, completely displayed, all mapped out with lasting memory. It's there forever. It's never going to go away. Shakespeare actually designed the brain, the digital brain that works the same way. All the information you receive goes into your brain, completely mapped out and displayed, easily accessible with lasting memory. It's always going to be there. So I really thought that was very interesting when I read that line in that sonnet a few years back and thought, wait a minute, that's the digital brain. So I always like to share that whenever I'm demoing my Shakespearean brain. So let me give you a complete tour of this brain and how the mapping out all of Shakespearean works in my digital brain really helps me to better understand Shakespeare, keep track of what I've read, what I haven't read, what plays are coming up, etc. Again, everything that he ever wrote are typically in the notes. I've got all of, if I just click on any sonnet, that sonnet pulls up right there in the notes content. So I can read all of the Shakespearean sonnets. Now, his actual plays are a little bit more detailed. I'll go ahead and jump into comedy. And I'm just going to pick A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's actually one of my absolute favorite Shakespearean plays. And notice down below, first off, I have a little bit of a character study. So I'm studying the characters of the play. Over on the right, I have a synopsis. If I'm going to see a play, many of the different plays that I have in my brain, I've got sort of I think you could probably call them the cliff notes. Notes that I've taken, notes that I've even just copied and pasted from the web. Certain lines that I like are all going to be over here in the notes section for the Shakespearean plays. And then the file attachment itself is always going to be a TXT file, just a plain text file. I chose to make these text files rather than Word documents because they launch right here in the brain's content window. So I can click on any one of these Shakespearean plays, and without ever leaving the brain, just open this up and scroll through and read through the entire script. All of this also is being indexed and searchable from within the brain. So if I'm doing a search for the character Lysander, notice that I've got actually a thought for Lysander. He's a member of in A Midsummer Night's Dream, actually. But I also have a link here to A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, and Lysander is mentioned in Hermia, Helena, etc. So they reference love interests within different plays as well. And notice many of my links also, you can see Theseus loves Hippolyta. So I can better understand and visualize who is interested in who in A Midsummer Night's Dream. The young lovers themselves, Titania and Puck, and then we have Theseus and Hippolyta, who we can get down to their children, or in this case, these are, I think they're called the mechanicals, Bottom and the flutes they put on the play within the play, if you're familiar with this particular play. So it gets a little bit complex, but I actually map out all of the individual characters, who they're interested in, what their relationships are, and it helps me better understand the play. If you're not familiar at all with A Midsummer Night's Dream, it can be terribly confusing. Not only the script itself or the language, but also who's in love with who at any one time. And people are getting spells cast on them so they fall in love with a man with the head of a donkey, etc. So there's a lot going on in the play, and I can really take my time in this area and understand the different relationships between all the different characters. And from time to time, from classical literature, there'll be a painting, and this is actually where the Bottom, Nick Bottom, I think his name is in the play, gets a spell cast on him so that he has the head of a mule, but the lady that's in love with him still loves him, etc. So it's a lot of fun to go through, and if I'm going to be seeing this play or seeing a movie, read through, again, the synopsis, maybe read the script itself, do some character studies just for my own enjoyment. And speaking of movies, let's move away from the actual plays. Notice that I'll often have a link to the actual movie. Now, I noticed this earlier at Midsummer Night's Dream. It used to be on Netflix. So I was browsing through this brain last week, actually, and noticed that I had an error on this particular thought. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave this here just so you can see how I maintain and manage this movie this brain from time to time. So Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, and notice when I mouse over, I see that this is a play. It is linked to the movie Midsummer Night's Dream, which was on Netflix and is obviously no longer there. So I'm going to search the web for Midsummer Night's Dream. I simply click on F4. You can also right-click on a thought or go up to, I believe it's Options, Search Web. So I'm searching the web right from the brain for Midsummer Night's Dream, I'll say film. I like to search in Bing, so notice that comes up first, but you can choose search for YouTube videos or even edit and add your own search engine here. But this will actually launch my web browser and take me directly to a search for a Midsummer Night's Dream film. And there it is on Roger Ebert. I think I'm going to go with IMDb. That link is probably never going to go away. So now I've got the IMDb link for a Midsummer Night's Dream, which actually I know if I scroll down, I don't see any pictures of him, but there he is. Kevin Kline was in this particular production. I really like Kevin Kline as an actor, so I'm going to share something else with you in a moment. But let's just grab this URL and simply drag and drop it right into the brain. So from time to time, I'll go in, I'll edit the thought's content. Now I go to the IMDb page for Midsummer Night's Dream so I can see when the movie was made or who's in the movie, etc. I'm actually going to delete this Netflix link. I'll just click and delete that attachment because Netflix no longer has that movie available. And so I've got my nice link there to A Midsummer Night's Dream, the movie. Now, I mentioned earlier, this movie has Kevin Kline in it. And if I click and drag a jump thought from A Midsummer Night's Dream to, is it Hamlet? I know he was in Hamlet. Oh, there we go. But if I scroll down, there he is, Kevin Kline. So the reason why when I start typing in Hamlet, it goes to a thought called Kevin Kline, because there is an attachment on that thought, and it's Kevin Kline's version of Hamlet. So I'm going to link those two together. So I double click, and A Midsummer Night's Dream is linked directly to the Kevin Kline movie version of Hamlet. And notice on the Hamlet thought, I've got links to Ethan Hawke, who did a Hamlet just a few years ago, a very modern adaptation of Hamlet. There's Kenneth Branagh, a real classic. Kevin Kline, Mel Gibson, and this is very interesting. Shelley mentioned earlier that the hero's journey, that Disney uses a lot of sort of the thought process on a hero's journey for their films. They use a lot of Shakespearean background ideas as well. The Lion King is an adaptation of Hamlet. If I were to say to you, there is a story about a young prince and his father, the king, was murdered by the prince's uncle so that he could rule the land. And the young prince finally grows up and decides to seek revenge after years of being away from the village or the country. Which have I described, the Hamlet or the Lion King? I've actually described both word for word. So, and I've got a lot of those playful little things happening in my brain as well. In fact, I noticed on A Midsummer Night's Dream, another favorite of mine, Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, is linked to a movie, early 90s movie called L.A. Story, starring Steve Martin. But again, just a total take on A Midsummer Night's Dream. And so I've got a lot of those hidden references linked up in my brain to better understand them. Another thing that I have in this brain is I'm not only studying just the literature and reading the books, I also want to know more about Shakespeare himself. So I have here linked to A Midsummer Night's Dream, 1594. So I've created basically a timeline for Shakespeare. from his birth in 1564 to his death in 1616, the different periods of when he was working for the Globe Theater or being hired by different people of persuasion back in that era, and what he wrote for them. So Lord Chamberlain being one of them. These are the different plays that he wrote while he was part of Lord Chamberlain's men. And it adds a little bit of extra context. If I go to the very beginning, so birth to marriage, he had 2 twins as children, didn't write anything that's known today until 1586. They call it the lost years, because not a lot is known about who he wrote these for or how they got out there. But in 1586, Henry VI, Part 1, 2, and 3, and Richard III, very heavy, dark theater. If you ever go to see one of these shows, sit tight. It's gonna be tough. So this is very serious stuff happening in these plays, historical dramas, tragedies. And then the very next era of his work, they call it the beginning, when he started having people start to critique him and his plays became more and more popular. What did he do? Full-on comedies. Taming of the Shrew, Comedy of Error, and Two Gentlemen of Verona. So he really switched gears and went from that heavy, dark theater to lighter comedy that was maybe a little more palatable at the time. I'm not sure. But again, it just adds a greater meaning to the play when you're reading Taming of the Shrew, knowing that he just came off of reading these dark, sad dramas. He wanted to have some fun and lighten things up a little. And so I like that extra context that he adds. And then we'll just fast forward all the way to the end, to his retirement. Very last play that he ever wrote is The Tempest. And when you read through about what had gone on in Shakespeare's life, and then you read the Tempest, his final play, in the play, 2 lovers are separated and one is sent off to a new world and bids farewell. Has a very tragic ending of not dying, but just saying farewell. And that's sort of Shakespeare's farewell to the stage and soon after to life itself. So having that greater context, that greater understanding when you read The Tempest really just gives it a little more significance and adds a little more weight. And here, once again, I still have my character studies, my sort of just overview of the play itself, and movies. The Forbidden Planet. If you're familiar with the movie Forbidden Planet, warning Will Robinson. That's really a take on The Tempest. Instead of being lost at sea, they're lost in space. So again, they're just another aspect of how I like to have fun with this particular brain. And then finally, the last component that I'll share with you, I'm just going to jump right back up to Shakespeare. And notice down below, I mentioned earlier, I've got resources myself. Even though I read Shakespeare a lot, really enjoy it, I don't always understand exactly what he is saying. So I have a Shakespearean dictionary that I've either created from, this started off as copying a Shakespearean dictionary with a lot of interesting things to actually adding my own words from time to time. So I'll come in, I'll find a word. I'm just picking a random letter, G, gape, to cry out loudly, or gallows. Well, I know what the gallows are, but also, did you know gallow can be a verb to frighten someone? Just as being sent to the gallows would scare you to death, to gallow someone is to frighten them. So, and notice this just scrolls on and on through a long list of some that are pretty much make sense, but others that take a little bit more in-depth research to understand exactly what it means when he's saying grief shot or great morning, broad daylight, etc. Some of them pretty understandable, others take a little bit of time to interest. So I refer back to my dictionary quite often and edit the dictionary on my own from time to time. So and also a list of words, over 1,700 different words that Shakespeare actually invented. It was never seen in writing before in our history. simple words like eventful, exposure, fitful, etc. Words that were first seen in Shakespearean plays. So Shakespeare has credit for over 1,700 English language words in our current dictionary. I've also got a link for current phrases and understanding iambic pentameter, which is his pattern that he would write his not his prose, but many of his books are written in iambic pentameter. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. They've got a certain number of syllables, etc. And then there's a feminine ending, which is different from the normal ending. To be or not to be, that is the question, is actually what they call a feminine ending, because there's this extra syllable at the end that shouldn't be there. Proper iambic pentameter would end after quest. To be or not to be, or not to be, that is the question. So there's just some real more in-depth studies into his language and his styles, etc. Again, a cheat sheet for Roman numerals, since many of his sonnets use Roman numerals. And even once again, I'm incorporating a little bit of fun. And my wife and I, my friends and I, we come into this area of my brain from time to time to look up just a quick Shakespearean insult. So this is actually a web page that I found that I absolutely love, and it just spits out a random insult from Shakespeare at you. From time to time, it will say actually what the play is from. Other times, they put together just random words. So there's no play here, but thou villainous Rampalian hugger mugger. And to understand what that means, I would have to go back to the dictionary. Maybe I don't even want to for that one. So those are my resources, a lot of great Shakespearean resources that I've collected, again, over the years in many different places, all into the brain. Once again, to refer back to, why don't I just find this available information online? I can find A Midsummer Night's Dream online, but when I find a word I don't understand or a phrase, I'm back to Google and searching for a Shakespearean dictionary out there somewhere that has this specific phrase that I'm looking for. Not all of them do. So this is a great gathering point for all of this information and all these resources. And finally, my games area, where I've got links to purchase Shakespearean action figures, Shakespearean Lego character. Hopefully these are coming up in real time here in the content window. And of course, everyone needs their Shakespearean bobblehead as well. Very, very important stuff. But there's some great games here, and great games that I've introduced actually to my kids. Shakespeare for Kids is actually a lot of fun. It sounds complicated. They've actually really, really dumbed it down and made it very simple and goofy and fun to play. So that's a game that my wife and I play with the kids, and then other just different games and links that I like to keep track of. So once again, this particular brain is available online. So I have synced this brain. I'll click on the sync button now. This syncs up to the brain cloud, and I've made this publicly available. So I just want to share with you, I shared just a little bit about how I edit and modify this particular brain. Shelley shared with us how we add content and build a brain. She actually imported data into her brain and made a lot of edits. And in this brain that I've clicked on the sync just to get the most recent version updated, notice I can click on online. I'm syncing this brain. It's set to sync automatically, but I can go to my brain access and sharing link, which is opening up right now. And this link that is checked that you see, it says allow public access. So this particular brain I'm sharing online, and actually everyone on the webinar today will receive a link to this brain so they can browse my Shakespearean brain online. But I also then have access to this brain, since it is synced to the web, from my iPhone as well. And that's an important aspect of the brain. I'm going to bring my camera back over. I hope I have my camera on. Yes, there I am. And so notice here's my brain app. We've got a brain app for the iPhone and Android. This opened up my last open brain, but I can scroll through this and actually download my Shakespearean brain right to my iPhone. So my iPhone will suddenly have access to all of the data in my Shakespearean brain. I can click, I can open a play, I can open research, I can open up my Shakespearean insult generator really quickly if the need ever arises. But that's one of the advantages of syncing your brain to your iPhone or to the cloud, is access from your iPhone, whether you're a personal writer yourself, whether you're an artist and you're capturing ideas. All of that information can be captured in the brain and then easily accessible from multiple devices. And with that, I think, Shelley, that's everything that I wanted to share today. And I believe Shelley had another call, so I'm going to actually go through the questions and see if we have any questions today. The first question that came up is, will today's webinar be recorded? And yes. Are you sure you want to close? Oh, let's say no. I want to save this info. So yes, today's webinar was recorded, and we will have our link available most likely tomorrow afternoon. It will be up on our website. So you can, if you did need to jump off the call early today, you can certainly watch a recording of the full webinar available tomorrow. And the next question, sort of in line with that, is, will these brains be accessible? So they'll not only be accessible for you to view online through the Brain Cloud, but we'll also share with you a BRZ file. That's a brain archive. So what I'll do with this brain is simply click on File and select Backup to Brain Archive. And this creates an individual BRZ file. So the entire brain zipped up into a single file, which will be available for download. When you make a BRZ file, you can actually keep it private, locked and secure, so only you with your account can log into the app and extract the data. In this case, I'll make it so that anyone can open up this BRZ that we'll share online and download it. You'll be able to open up yourself, and if you're a Shakespeare enthusiast, you can start adding your own digital information. Now, we are not sharing a brain in Team Brain. In other words, if you make changes in your version of the brain, I won't see them on my end. So they won't get synced up to the cloud under my account. You would be able to change the GUID. It's a little bit more of a technical process, but you could change the ID for that brain that you download and sync it to your own account. So you've got my brain as sort of the starter pack, and you add your own digital data into it and sync it up to the cloud. So both my brain and Shelley's writer's brain. Now, Shelley does have a lot of personal information in her brain. This is a brain that contains complete works of Shakespeare that I never wrote. So it's got my own library and my own notes here and there in it, but I'm happy to share those with the world. So Shelley's brain does have some of her writing, some proprietary information. So she has a modified version of her brain that she'll share, and that link will be available to everyone, once again, that joined the call today. And it looks like Jean had just a couple more questions, which is, how do you decide when to create a new brain? So Jean, that's an excellent question. Those of you that know me or that have ever joined a Brain 101 call know that I keep very small topic-specific brains. So this brain, for example, if I click on the properties and go down, you can see this brain has about 400 thoughts in it. So not too much. Some of my other brains have well over 1,000, 5,000, even 10,000 thoughts. This is a very specific topic, Shakespearean writing and research. So I keep it as a separate brain. There's no right or wrong answer. I could very easily have made a branch in my personal brain that I do share on my Brain 101 calls. So my hobbies would be baseball, woodworking, Shakespeare, and canoeing. Those are sort of my interests in life. Outdoors camping fall in there into those areas as well. And so I could have easily made a branch that said Shakespeare and created that brain completely in my master brain. However, I like to keep several topics separate for many reasons. Number one, I can then share them. I wouldn't be able to share my master brain with the world because it's got my tax and accounting information in there and references to investments and health history and personal information that I'm not going to share with the world. So from time to time, I decide I'm going to keep this brain separate, and so I start a separate brain. Also, in other scenarios, I have started creating a brain, and I'll open up my master brain. I call it my lore bloom brain. There's just a personal meaning to that. But anytime you open up a new brain, you start with the most recent thought that you've activated. So here I'm creating a little weekend checklist. We're having a birthday party for my wife, and I am taking care of all the food. I'm very excited, myself and my kids. So I'm keeping track of what needs to be purchased, what recipes I need, etc. So I'm keeping track of images of cakes that I like and things like that. So it's just a random thought in this brain. However, let's say I go to Matt Caton thought, and I'll go to land. So furniture, museum, cars, magazines, etc. Buried sort of in lore bloom furniture is watercraft. I like building, oops, that's the wrong icon. Here we go. Canoes and kayaks and wooden framed boats. So part of this brain I separated into a separate brain called Build a Canoe. And the only reason is because I wanted to share that with a friend that has the same interest. Do they need to know about my party supplies for the weekend and what type of cake I'm going to be baking with my kids? No, they don't. They just want to know about the canoeing. So it's a more advanced feature, but you certainly can segment a master brain into a smaller topic-specific brain, or import smaller topic-specific brains into one master brain. So, Jean, to answer your question, there's no right or wrong answer. Do what feels comfortable for you, and you can always go back and merge or segment at a later date. I would say the main advantage of putting everything in one brain is I can do one search. So if I do a search in this brain for Shakespeare, I might find something. Yes, I do have some Shakespeare information in this particular brain. Thanksgiving recipes. I'm not sure why I have Shakespeare there, but it came up that Shakespeare appears in the note for this thought. So that's interesting. But regardless, you can always go back and change and modify. Putting it all in one brain makes the search incredibly powerful. However, putting them into smaller topic-specific brains makes them easy to share. So those are a couple of the pros of each choice that you make. And Jean also asked, how do you find public brains that others have created? So in version 8, when you were syncing to the version 8 cloud, we did have an explore page where you could go on and explore and find cooking brains and recipe brains, or brains on cars, or whatever your hobbies and interests are. You could do a search and find a brain on that topic. For many different reasons, we have taken that down, and now you would need to share your brain with someone else. So my Shakespeare brain, if I don't give you the URL, most likely you aren't going to find it. I could embed it in my website, and if you're doing a search for Shakespearean websites, you might stumble across it that way. But to actually find the brain itself, again, I would need to, I'll click on Shakespeare, online, and brain access and sharing. I'm going to need to send you this URL. So we do not have an explore page for publicly available brains. You would need to actually share the URL. It's something that we're thinking about building again in the future if we get enough requests for it. But as it stands right now with version 10 of the brain, when you sync a brain and make it publicly accessible, the next step is to get that URL out there to your friends and colleagues, because the content of your brain on our website, on app.thebrain.com, is not being indexed by Google. So you're not going to stumble across this. You'd have to know that URL to get to that brain. And Marlita, I hope I pronounced that right, asked the question, could you please tell me how to find out how many thoughts there are in a particular brain? I never thought to look. Yes, so each brain that you run has a report, and the report feature is a feature of the pro version of the brain. So for a pro user, pro license, or pro combo user, if I click this little button here next to the search box, I can also click on View Report, and at the very bottom will be a number. Then these are the default settings. Is the number of how many thoughts are in this brain. So 396 thoughts in this particular brain. Then if I filter, show me all thoughts with attachments, there are 44 thoughts with file attachments in this particular brain. So there's a lot that you can do with the reports to sort of review your data, what's been recently edited, what has file attachments, internal, external, etc. So there's a lot that you can do with the reports. But also another way to do this process is if I click on File and I go to Statistics. And any user can do this. Even if you're a free user of the brain, you can open up your statistics, the File, Statistics, and there it is, 396 thoughts, 15 forgotten thoughts. So I forgot a thought but haven't deleted it yet. There are 528 links. So I'm averaging 1.28 links per thought. Not necessarily critical information to know, but sometimes it's kind of fun. People like to know what their link to thought ratio may be. If I open up my master brain, again, master brain with the exception of I've segmented a lot of data out into other topic specific brains, but this is my main brain for cooking and woodworking. And I go down to down to statistics. So this brain has 3,500 thoughts. And my link to thought ratio is a little bit lower, actually. I only have 1.14 links per thought on this particular brain. Again, neither is good or bad. It's just information that you might need to know at some point. And Jean mentioned my points helped, my pointers helped, so thank you very much. And Paul asked the question, so are you saying that a public brain cannot be searchable by Google at all? That's correct. As it exists right now, the brain databases are not being indexed. What's more than that, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of security, first off, you can send a note into support@thebrain.com, and we'll share all of our security information with you, that what happens to a brain, how secure it is when you sync it to the cloud. If I were to sync a brain, this brain that you're looking at right now, my Thanksgiving, not my Thanksgiving brain, this is my Lore Bloom brain, but this brain itself is, that checkbox is not checked. It's kept private, which means it's password protected, not being indexed, it's not searchable, no one can access this brain. And I feel very comfortable in saying that, that no one can access this brain or the data inside this brain. When you sync a brain to the cloud, the upload, the storage, the download, all secure. And again, send a note into support@thebrain.com if you want to know more about the security settings that we have. We use the same type of security encryption as the US government. So we feel very confident about how we're securing our data. And even employees such as myself, administrators on the server that you're syncing to, if you choose to sync your brain, I don't have access to your password. I can't see it. It's salted and hashed, and I have no access to your data. The only thing I see as an administrator is that Joe Smith at whatever.com has a brain account, and he has synced 5 brains, and here's the file size that he's taking up on our server. That's about all I can see. Again, I would need to know the URL to go to that brain, and that the owner of that brain, would they even need to make that brain publicly accessible? So, and Shanto, thank you for joining us today. And Shanto had the question, is it safer to separate brains than a big master brain, and ways to protect double backup? So safer, one way or another, there's, again, no right or wrong answer. Is it safe to have just one large brain or several smaller topic-specific brains? One isn't safer than the other. They're both password protected by your account information and secure when you sync them to the cloud. I guess I would say this, Shanto, to answer your question, it makes it much easier to back up just one brain. So here's my brain list. of all the brains that I utilize. Some of them are just test brains, like this brain loop. I just use this for testing because I'm also testing the next generation that the engineers are providing us of the brain software. So I'll update to this, the brain 11, the brain 12, which doesn't exist yet. I'm using that as an example. But I'll update my version of the brain and use this brain for all my testing because it's just gibberish and random thoughts. Other brains have very specific information, whether it's a brain that I'm sharing with someone else as a hobby or interest, research that I'm doing, or a brain that I only use for a demo, such as creating the ultimate tech brain is a demo brain that we used not too long ago. But this is my demo brain that I use for presentation. So many different brains for different purposes. If I want to back them all up and make sure I've got a secure backup of each one, I have to go to each brain and click on File, back up to Brain Archive to back up my own local copy. Now, I trust our server, so I'm also just syncing these, and I know that I've got a copy of this brain out there on the web as well. So that's another way to keep a secure backup, is just to make sure that your brain is set to auto sync as well. And then finally, the last question that came in was from Bethany. And Bethany says, I am a new brain user. I am using brain version 8. How do I, and I think you were probably going to finish that with, how do I move the brain version 8 into, oh no, there it is. I just didn't scroll down. How do I move it? I was right. How do I move into the brain version 9? Well, our current release of the brain is the brain 10. So you can download the brain 10 at www.thebrain.com/download. But Bethany, if, for example, there's something about version 9 that you like, or you purchased version 9 but not yet purchased version 10 and you want to stay on 10, there's a link on our download page to download older versions, and you can get version 9 and install it from there as well. So in fact, I'll actually open up on my browser. I go to the Brain website, and on the download page, if I scroll down, so this is going to download the latest, greatest version 10 of the Brain. Here's where you can get an older version. So we still offer, if you need to download version 8 or one of version 9, 9.0 or 9.1, those are still available as well. So you can download and install the older versions. Now, if you're on 9 or 10 and you want to import version 8, your version 8 database into the Brain 10, I would click on File and select Import. And this very top option allows you to import an existing .brain file or .brain zip. So with version 8, let's say, Bethany, you had a brain called Bethany. So you would have somewhere on your C drive or on your Mac a Bethany.brain file and a Bethany_brain folder. So you can open up version 8 and open your brain and see the brain name, and there's even a way to see where that brain is saved. And then you come into 10 and select to import a version 8 brain, click on select file, and navigate to find that. And here's my Shakespeare.brain zip, the backup I made long ago that I was reviewing before today's webinar. So I just simply click and say open, and the process will begin. The brain will take care of the rest. It's going to review the data, and then the select file changes to import. So you click on import to finish the process. Should be very straightforward, very simple. So again, just open up 9 or 10, file, click on import, and make sure you're importing a .brain zip or .brain file, and go out and find it on your hard drive, and the brain will take care of the rest. So your databases don't automatically update to 9 or 10. That is a manual process. And Bethany, if you have any problem with that process, or anyone out there, if you've got another question about the brain that we either didn't get to today or that comes to you at a later moment, please feel free to write into us at support@thebrain.com. We've got a great support team. We're happy to hear from you and help you through whatever questions or processes that you may have. importing brains or segmenting brains, some of the more advanced topics that we talked about today. Happy to share more information with you through support@thebrain.com. So thanks again, everyone, for joining Shelley and myself today. It's always a pleasure to share different ways to use the brain with the brain community. And again, we've got some great resources on our website. If you're looking for a manual or further tutorials, visit our website at thebrain.com or write into us at support@thebrain.com. So have a great rest of the week and enjoy visualizing your writing projects in your digital brain. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.